Great pleasure to introduce Andrew Constance. I've got back-to-back ministers this morning, and they're two of my favourites, but you probably couldn't find two more different blokes, Andrew Constance and Rob Stokes. Andrew, who's the ultimate scrapper. He's the Transport Minister who's building things, who's getting on with the job, who just as happily have a blue across the with his Labor colleagues as he would his Liberal colleagues in Canberra. So it's all in defence of driving this city, delivering what we need in a town that's always been famous for a bit of catch and kill. So we don't do polite that easily. We don't always collaborate that well in this city, but in a region like Western Sydney, we have to if we want to deliver this. But even more important than collaboration, we need strong leadership to stare it down, to get on with it, move forward, particularly when you're in charge of hundreds of millions and billions of dollars of investment that he's driving. To give his reflections on where this BOOMTOWN of ours goes, where the track's to be laid, how we'll move people around, would you please welcome the Minister for Transport, Andrew Constance. And he's up for some questions at the end, so start thinking when he's finished.
Thanks. Thank you, mate. Thank you. Thank you, Chris, and good morning, everybody. First of all, can I acknowledge country and particularly just thank Matilda for welcome to country and pay my respects to elders both past, present and into the future. And there is no doubt, as Chris alluded to, in terms of BOOMTOWN, yes, we can all reflect on what we need to do into the future, but it's also quite important to actually reflect on the past. Because the reason I want to do that is because I know there's a couple of sceptics in the room. And I'll say this, those sceptics think that we can't build Metro West alone as a state government. Well, the reality is we can. And let me put it into context for you. So far, this government in the last 9 years, almost 9 years, has delivered some incredible mega projects. If you think about it, we have now delivered the first stage of the North West Metro at $7.3 billion. We have, of course, seen the opening of the M4 East tunnel in recent times, again, in excess of $4 billion there. And we've got light rail, we've got Newcastle light rail, we've got duplication of the Pack Highway, we've got major investments that have gone on and on and on and on. As a government, we have spent literally in excess of $110 billion in the time we've been in office. The reason we've been able to do that, of course, is we've been recycling capital through lazy assets on our balance sheet, lease them to the private sector, and then, in essence, monetise future cash flows, put it into an infrastructure, and then build more assets, which, of course, you can recycle, which is what has been happening with the WestConnex project. The reason I've said that is that in the context of Metro West, which will be profiled in essence between now and the end of the 2020s, we'll be expending in the order of probably somewhere between $2 and $2.5 billion a year on that project in order to build it. Okay, well, let's put that into context. At the moment, Transport alone is spending $1.16 billion a month. A month. We'll be doing that for the next 4 years. Some $56 billion in the next 4 years on roads and transport infrastructure in New South Wales. We've already been spending over $1 billion a month in the last 4 years. And if you put that into context, overall, $93 billion of infrastructure being built in the next 4 years by the state government, 56 of that in transport and roads. Now, I'm pretty confident that we can profile the Metro West project over the 10 years on the basis of the way in which we're running the state's finances, be it through asset recycling, be it through good management of the books, be it through the 10-year capital works program that Transport has in place, and, of course, we have infrastructure projects which are being supported by the national government in and around Western Sydney and, of course, also more broadly across the state. So, for us, to put $6.4 billion into this year's budget, to get on with the property acquisitions, get on with the final business case, get on with a very clear now engagement with the private sector to get the tunnel boring machines back into the ground, because this will be largely a project underground between the city and Parramatta, is very, very doable. Not only doable, it's going to happen. So I wanted to put that into context because I know that there has been this concern. Well, I'm not concerned. I'm just getting on with it. And I know certainly the message out of the Premier last night was, let's get to the next level. Let's take infrastructure even further and harder in this state. Take it to an even greater unprecedented level in terms of the delivery. And at its core is Greater Western Sydney. I mean, let's think about the next 10 years. Let's think about what Greater Western Sydney will be like by the end of the 2020s. We will have the T1 Western Line duplicated with a metro train between the city and Parramatta. Travel time in the order of 20 minutes. The beauty with Metro West is, of course, it's the first stage of the east-west link between the city and Badgerys Creek Airport. At the same time, we're also going to continue to see major road investments in terms of Greater Western Sydney. Next year alone, we will see the opening of North Connects, which links the M1 and the M2. We will see the opening of the M5 East tunnels. And of course, you've already started to experience the benefits of West Connects with the opening of the M4 East tunnels. Then, of course, we're going to see the advent of Badgerys Creek Airport, and a very real focus, as you've seen from this government, in relation to employment lands, the industrial capacity, the residential capacity, the educational capacity in and around that precinct. And my favourite, in terms of a very large agribusiness precinct in and around Western Sydney Airport. I can say that as the member for Bega. Of course, at the same time, we're now delivering $4 billion in conjunction with the Commonwealth in terms of the Western Sydney Roads program. The Northern Road duplication, for instance, Mulgoa Road, the M12, which is going to link the M7 to the airport. And of course, as part of it, we are going to see a greater focus in terms of what is going to happen further west with the duplication of the Great Western Highway, which is also being delivered by this government. And that plays an important role in terms of the freight with Western Sydney Airport. Coupled with, of course, another metro train, which we're jointly funding with the national government, which links Badgerys Creek to St Mary's, which is an important first stage in terms of what's known as the North-South line, which will be that Greater Western Sydney metro at the airport. And of course, I've got Darryl Carey in the room. We're going to see a new ANZ stadium. Now, the important point about that is that the Metro West train will be able to take people from the heart of the city to that stadium and that precinct in around 14 minutes once it's open. It's a train which will travel at 120 kilometres per hour. There's been 7 stops identified, and of course, it is going to completely transform Western Sydney. So there is, in light, is what lays ahead. And I think certainly we have to remain focused. For me, as a minister who's obviously fairly close to what's happening in terms of the project teams, yeah, we've got some interesting market conditions. The capacity constraints that people talk about, well, I look at that as capacity opportunities. We're completely growing our TAFE in a different way in terms of establishing in partnership with our major infrastructure builders, infrastructure skills centres alongside the big builds that we're undertaking across this state. It's giving people wonderful opportunities for the first time to work on infrastructure. You know, as a member for Bega, I take great delight every time I go home. We've got a brand new Batemans Bay Bridge being built, $270 million. But what's most heartening about it is there is an infrastructure skills centre sitting right next to that project. There's nothing more heartening than seeing a 45-year-old Aboriginal lady say for the first time, I'm working, I've got the skills, and I'm participating in the building of a local project. Western Sydney has exactly the same opportunities, and we're also delivering in this regard. It's why we've established key employment targets when it comes to building infrastructure, be it for Aboriginal people, be it for young people, be it for women. And this is really important in terms of the social fabric of our state moving forward, that we provide those skill opportunities. And Western Sydney is at its core. So for me, this is going to be a real boom in the next 10 years. Don't go changing the government. I'll give you that message. Because I'll just stop everything dead. Stone Mother's Gold dead. But the reality is, if we remain disciplined and we work in partnership, this is going to be a very strong Western Sydney, building on the excellent foundations that already exist in that region of New South Wales. Thank you. Questions.
So, ladies and gentlemen, the floor is yours. The man's only got about $100 billion worth of projects. If you can't get one sorted by the end of the session today, I'll be surprised. But there's a couple have come in, but please put your hand up if you have a question. But can I kick off, Minister? I'm not one of the sceptics who says you can't build the train on your own, but I'm one of the ones, proud New South Welshman, who wants some of that federal coin to come and help you, and maybe take it further, build it quicker, all sorts of things. You're having fun playing with your federal colleagues. I think I'm one of the people who walked into Minister Tudge's room the day to ask for some federal money as you were on the front page of the Herald telling him you should give it to him, which certainly increased his mood as we walked in the door. The normal cut and thrust of federal-state relations over this, do you get the impression there is as much focus on that partnership as could be, or is it a constant calibration of who should pay for what?
Good question. I'll organise my media around your meetings in Canberra next time. Look, I think there's a couple of things, Chris, to your point, and I do want to acknowledge the Western Sydney Leadership Dialogue for taking on all governments. The thing that's driving me crazy about infrastructure at the moment is the duplication. I've said previously, we don't need 3 tiers of government in this country building commuter car parks and traffic intersections. We don't need that. The reality is that all infrastructure expertise resides within the states, particularly Victoria and New South Wales. So what we need out of Canberra is a national policy framework which incentivises the states to make sure that their pipelines do deliver incredible productivity uplift for the nation. I mean, it's an absolute disgrace that Queensland has not been able to lease its poles and wires, get itself out of all the woes that it's in, and bolster national productivity with unlocking major freight pinch points in that state, let alone deal with the congestion issues which are holding back Queensland. We've been able to do that because we were able to make it clear to the community that we were transacting on these assets to build. Recycling capital, the poles and wires transaction has resulted in $7 billion going into the Metro City Southwest project. So the national framework in terms of infrastructure does very much need to look at ways in which the states are incentivised to ensure that their pipelines are strong and deliver great productivity uplift for the nation. What I don't like seeing is where there is inconsistencies in terms of infrastructure pipelines. I've made that clear to Minister Tudge that we've got to make sure there's complete alignment into the future, because ultimately we've got an incredible program. In fairness to the national government, though, and I will say this because ultimately all these messages seem to go back to them, the first point is this. The national government for the first time is investing in public passenger trains in Sydney with the metro that's going to extend from the airport to St Mary's. That is a massive change if you think about it. National government in New South Wales has typically been about roads investments and the like. They're building the Western Sydney Airport, but of course that's now triggered a requirement in terms of rail investment equivalent to 4 times the expenditure of the airport, plus, probably even greater if you think about it. So the state can't just pick up that infrastructure bill and run the operational element to that as well, because we heavily taxpayer subsidise our public transport in New South Wales. So there's an operational cost associated with the infrastructure in the longer term as well. So for us, it's really important. I do note that, and this is the other thing I will say, Chris, everyone has to be realistic about value capture too. There is a little bit of a mindset that has said, well, yeah, value capture will pay for that in the future. No, I actually think that if you're going to look at value capture in Australia, realistically, it can work in and around metro station precincts, but at best you'll ever see is a return of 10 to 15% of the capital cost of a project. So we have to be realistic around the contribution that can be made through the investment community to actually building the infrastructure. And yes, it's great that there is that ability to share in the uplift, but it's not the be-all and end-all in terms of the ultimate innovative financing solutions that we need to look at. This government has been innovative. If you think about WestConnex, and the reason I raise this, we've built an asset off balance sheet, $16.8 billion of motorway. We've created value by actually getting on and building it in stages, but we're recycling the capital through the stages. And you know, I know there's a lot of argument in relation to tolls, but the reality is tolls facilitate the ability for the community to have infrastructure generations ahead of time. Generations ahead of time. And at the same time allow the state to be able to continue to run its hospitals, its schools, its police stations, fire stations, the list goes on. So, that's been an example where we've been able to generate the value of an asset off balance sheet, recycle the capital and keep building. And that's really important as well.
Minister, can I present you with what's slated today, the report of our recent study in East London, where Transport was part of that with us. We love the line in there that Committee for London ran a campaign to government saying, please charge us 2 pennies in the pound levy that raised £4.2 billion of private contributions to help build the Crossrail. So while I know you and I share a general view in favour of the concept of value capture, we think there is plenty, and it's rare. This is business saying we are happy to give you some more money to bring things on quicker, to take them further. So I know it's always going to be a big political swallow, the thought that someone else will run a campaign saying just running big taxes on us. And we know we have to be in the trenches with you. We'll continue to remind you Western Sydney is prepared to pay to play on reasonable forms of value capture. Though in terms of, there's one of the questions coming from Twitter about role of industry, which is the other side, the contractors. People across the infrastructure sector are talking more and more about profitless boom with shrinking margins on major projects. What can you do to help make sure you've got plenty of people lining up for bids? Because it is hard to comprehend this boom we're having, unmistakable. You're spending a fortune on it, yet I don't know that the contractors are getting rich off it. So is it just the lawyers? I'm not quite sure where the money's going.
Well, from my perspective, in the interest of the taxpayer, I expect competitive tension through all bids for our work. And I also think that obviously we need a deeper pool in terms of contractor expertise. If there's any constraints in relation to the market, it typically relates to project managers. Obviously I think we're doing a very good job at broadening the base in terms of the skill set. I think the challenge when it comes to contractors, and this is what I hear, issues around insurance, but also the risk appetite. So that typically relates to things that are hidden, be it utilities, be it, for argument's sake, asbestos. I've never seen so much asbestos in my life in this portfolio. Every time we touch a road, there's asbestos. It's extraordinary. So, just having a better understanding in terms of that risk appetite is important. There is, ultimately a need for people to generate wealth, to remain strong and keep the economy strong. So, this notion and concept of profitless boom, I'm not quite of that viewpoint yet. I think we have some really good opportunities. I know there's a lot of great Tier 2 companies out there and Tier 3s who are going to have enormous opportunities because we have to, in many ways, make sure that in some cases, we have to go to market with smaller contracts, the $100 million to $500 million jobs. I announced the EIS the other day for West Harbour Tunnel and Beaches Link. You couldn't build that project with one contract. It's too big. So we've got to look at the opportunities that flow through in that regard. I just think, ultimately, if the pipeline's strong, the bidding's strong, and we have fantastic project managers on government side as well as the contractor side, there's no reason why lawyers should be paid. If you can build up good relationships, then that results in good outcomes. And we've seen that, I have to say, particularly in the last 12 months with the CBD light rail. The project management teams on both sides over the last 12 months have been excellent. So, I think there's an example.
Before I ask you the next question that's coming, I better say something nice for you because it's a little tougher. Last night, I see the great Rod Staples over here too. Last night, the Premier stood on stage as a very proud announcer of the 2 projects of the year, both being state government projects. One, Darryl Kerry and Paul Dawn's magnificent Bankwest Stadium, home of the mighty Eels, home of the mighty Wanderers. Let's hope it does for the Wanderers what it did for the Eels this year and really revved them up with a nice home ground. Paul Letter has promised me that's going to happen, the black and red and the blue and gold. But Metro Northwest, 9 million passenger movements already. So congratulations on that, recognised by the region as our major project for the year in its excellence. Which gets me to congratulations, you're moving forward on Metro West. Now you've got the business case through and announced and moving on Metro West. Does it allow us to come back to the next question, which was Parramatta Light Rail 2 seems to be off, that everyone's talking about. I know you're not, but there's a general community view that whatever happened to Parramatta Light Rail 2 goes from Parramatta through to Olympic Park. Stage 2 is needed to make the most of Stage 1. Can we at least see the route is the question? And can I add, I know you and I discussed, and we're flexible on what sort of mode, whether it's a tram, whether it's a trackless tram, bus, we don't mind, it's the route and the service I care more about. But what's its status, and what can we tell the people of Ermington that they're going to see some movement and to particularly link Parramatta and Olympic Park in addition to the Metro?
I always get bewildered when I start reading stories in papers about projects, and I sometimes question the motivation behind it. I mean, let me be crystal clear. We're building Parramatta Light Rail right now. Big project. And, it will be an incredible success story. But can someone please explain to me why I would be that naive to not go and have a look at other technology when it relates to what is known as the routes around Parramatta Stage 2? I mean, for goodness sake, we've got provinces in China which are now developing technology with vehicles that can carry 350 people on a dedicated, single, isolated, standalone lane with the appropriate stops and a trackless tram so we don't have to go and rip up utilities and everything else. That's exactly what I'm doing, and I've got the time frame to do it. So, I just say this. We have seen a lot of talk around this, but we do need to build a transport solution along the corridor which is known as Parramatta Stage 2. It's important because, one of the first things I'm going to do is get on and actually build a bridge between Wentworth Point and Melrose Park so there's connectivity across there. And guess what? I'm going to build a nice wide bridge, and guess what? It'll cater for potentially a trackless tram or even better, some form of electrified vehicle which is going to be able to move and be a mass transit solution. That's all I'm doing. Not cancelling anything. We're just going to have a look at better ways to build it. You all do that in your businesses every day. I'm going to do it for the taxpayer. At the same time, let's celebrate Parramatta Light Rail being built. I've built Newcastle. We've delivered the one out, down the street. And we're going to have a great solution for Parramatta. The other thing is that the transport solution we're talking about here is in essence a precinct-to-precinct transport solution. It's not the mass transit solution that a metro will bring. A metro train can carry in excess of 40,000 people per hour. What we're talking about is a transport solution for around 6,000 to 7,000 people per hour. So it makes it a very, very different project with a very, very different transport outcome. So, absolutely we're getting on with looking at how to build out the corridor, the way we're going to do it. We start with that bridge because that's important with the connectivity. I'm very conscious of the residential towers that are going up in and around Sydney Olympic Park. We're going to see a lot more people living in this part of Sydney. And we've just got to make sure that we do have the precinct-to-precinct transport solution right. And just on this score, and I forgot to say it in my speech, one thing that we do need to do for Western Sydney is electrify the bus fleet. Chris talks about the trip to London. I was in London around that time when the British Australian Chamber of Commerce were having their forum, And I had a meeting with Transport for London, and one of the things that struck me and Stu Wallace, who was with me, my Chief of Staff, is that they said in that meeting that in London thousands of people are dying because of diesel particulates and diesel fumes because of everything from diesel buses to obviously the vehicle fleet. We have not, and I'm now insisting on it, we actually get some proper air quality testing done for our communities, particularly in Western Sydney. We need to electrify our bus fleet, which is why I've moved on franchising the STA, because it raises us significant dollars to be able to invest back into the new technologies. The research overseas is very scary in terms of the impact of the health of our community. We are talking underweight babies. We are talking children with learning difficulties. We're talking about high rates of asthma and cancer and the like. And if you actually think about it, I mean, Sydney is a basin, and whilst this side of the city enjoys the nor'easters on a hot summer afternoon, the rest of the city doesn't. So we are going to move in this sense, and that does mean looking at the very nature of our transport infrastructure, the design of our bus depots, the design of our buses. And I am going to come back to the community next year with some very hard, fast targets in terms of a pathway to deliver what is an important change for our city and Western Sydney.
Well, there you go. Even Brett Newman, the CEO of Parramatta, they're getting me excited. Everyone knows. To all of us, any sceptics about Parramatta Light Rail, as the Minister said, he's building a bridge, so get over it. So thank you for your recommitment to that project. You know, it's one very dear to our heart as well, to make it happen. In thanking Andrew and Constance, as I said before, it's good to know there's one tough hombre on the watch. When you're spending this much taxpayer money, when you're wrestling and wrangling not only contractors but federal government, local government, community expectation. And I think it's really easy for us to forget the sheer enormity of what's going on because we've almost come up in recent times with such expectation of infrastructure. Those like me have been doing this business for that long. It is such an enormous time of increased growth. The floor has come up to here. The expectation grows with it. And, poor Minister and department secretaries and others have got to manage increased expectation. We all want a gilt edge. We all want it yesterday. We all don't want to pay for it when it comes. But I think the greatest advantage you can take is the 9 million people travelling it, the change in the environment in this city in 12 months from where it was this event last year, where the very nature of infrastructure was under threat and the punters have responded really well to great infrastructure. But in thanking you today, not only your partnership for your department with this event that's been ongoing for 5 years, but the partnership that Transport has right through the system with our region. We are a region, as East London showed us, you can't develop Western Sydney without the spines, the transport spines. It's not all you need a lot of social overlay. But increasingly, I think we're seeing the role of transport as a player, not only in economic curation, but social fabric of a city as well, to overcome that tyranny of distance. And as I think I quoted one of our young new staff the other day, talking about the new project, saying, in Western Sydney, we're not used to having good stuff. We always got the trains without air conditioning, the rattlers. We didn't get the fancy theatres and stadiums and others. And I think, if anything, it's the recognition that Western Sydney will respond to quality and respond very, very well, whether it's the quality of your carriage, whether it's the quality of your seat at the football or your seat at the theatre, the new Coliseum and others, the powerhouse that's coming. And we have around that cabinet table a person who gets our region and gets how much it needs to drive forward. Please join me in thanking Andrew Constance.